never focusing enough on cocktails until now.
Yeah.
Because cocktails matter. We love to drink them as much as wine and beer and straight spirits. And it's so fantastic to have our bar manager, Ray Yoon, here. When did you join the club, Ray?
Back in 2020, middle of the pandemic.
In the mid-pandemic.
Yeah.
And here we are, and here you are, and welcome. We're in fabulous hands with Ray.
Well, thank you for the intro. Yeah, it's Wine30, but we'll not be talking about wine today. Specifically about time travel cocktails, so about the history of cocktails and where we are with cocktails today, and how we got to that path. So, quick history lesson, talking about the origin of cocktails. The actual term cocktail, there's no definitive reason why it's called cocktail. There's a lot of theories. A lot have to do with rooster tails and garnishes. A lot of different theories, but we do know that the first published record of a cocktail was in 1803. Well, we thought it was for a while, but it mentioned the cocktail and a hangover. And that was the first published record that we knew of. And in 1806, they defined the first cocktail as liquor, sugar, water, and bitters. So if you think of like the most basic cocktail, like something like an old fashioned, you have your bourbon, liquor, your sugar, simple syrup or cube of sugar, water from your ice, and bitters. So for a while, that was the definition of what a cocktail was. You also had a sling where if it didn't have bitters, it was just exactly the same thing. And the first cocktail recipe we have is from 1831 by Captain J.E. Alexander. Very vague, but it was a third of spirit to 2/3 of water, add bitters, enriched with sugar and nutmeg. So a lot of the times you'll see historically with cocktails, the trend is you use what you have at hand, and during that time there's a lot of importing spices and a lot of stuff like that. So that's where the nutmeg came in during that time. And then you have Frederick Ice King Tudor, which kind of paved the way for the cocktail scene and ice cream. So he's from Boston. Came from a rich family, and he was trying to figure out a way to import all these ice because he was rich, so he had an ice house. He was able to enjoy something cold where the rest of the world wasn't able to enjoy anything cold, and he wanted to share that experience. It never took off in the first bit when he was partnered with his brother. His brother even dropped out, gave up on the idea. He pushed through. He gave bartenders a full first year of free ice just to show people what difference a cold cocktail has, because they were always drinking something room temperature or whatever temperature it was outside.
Do you think there were cubes or chips?
From what I heard, it was big blocks of ice. And then he taught them how to keep, like they weren't fridges, but how to keep those blocks of ice together to keep them cold in like a separate container. I think his first shipment was to Cuba, and it was a huge like block size of however big many ice cubes he put together on a ship, and tried to ship it to Cuba. Did not work. Yeah. A little bit far journey there, but he did. He gave up on the idea because obviously it didn't work to Cuba, but he spread it around America and kind of brought that scene, and that's kind of where cocktails and ice cream came from. And then you have Jerry Thomas. If you don't know Jerry Thomas, he wrote the first bartender guide, and that kind of paved the way for what cocktail recipes and the innovation of cocktails, and not just pouring spirits and beers and kind of like your old school style. So this is an example of the Colombian repository where they define cocktail as spirit of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters. And it is vaguely called a bitter sling. And that's why I said a regular sling is something without the bitters.
Was this supposed to be consumed before dinner, after dinner? Were they using it as a digestif to?
That I'm not too sure about actually, but I do know a lot of times where cocktails kind of grew and became popular was from just making a lot of their liquor wasn't as refined as it is right now. And it's just making that more palatable. A lot of times if you're making like bathtub gin or something, you want to make it drinkable and not completely disgusting. And yeah, this is a book
Original.
that DJ found on Amazon for $600 US.
We're gonna buy it for Ray.
Yeah. Cash donations accepted. Yeah. There is Jerry Thomas. Really great picture. So that is the blue blazer that he was very famous for, and that's what paved the way for the whole cocktail scene. And why this picture is so important is it showed a sense of showmanship in bartending and having that presence behind the bar that makes a bartender. For doing something like a fire show is kind of a big way to start it off. It really paved the way for building your individual style. And you see bartenders, even when they pour and when they shake, they all have their own rhythm. They have their own specific like way they hold the bottle, hold the jigger. And it really is an expression of your true style. And that's why this first book by Jerry Thomas was so important.
What was in the blue light?
The blue blazer.
Blazer.
It was, I can't remember the exact recipe. I think it was overproof bourbon or whiskey and bitters, and he flamed it, tossed it around, and it's a pretty gross drink, but it does look pretty. Yeah. So that's an example of the Farmers magazine where they first found the word cocktail and the first hangover. The interesting is for a really long time, we thought the Farmers magazine and the repository before was the oldest. We're now discovering that it is actually not the oldest, but for a while we did. And that is Mr. Ice King Tudor himself carrying a big block of ice on a ship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, went really well for him.
It's a cocktail.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we talk cocktails, it's really important to understand the punch, which is our first drink that we'll be making today. So in the 18th century British local punch houses, they were kind of like the first bar scene that involved cocktails. And they were inspired, the Indians and Asians have been doing it for quite a long time, but they never had an official establishment dedicated to it. And that's where it kind of grew, was in Britain. It was inspired by all their spices and everything they imported as well. And in the 19th century, they began sweetening with oleosaccharum, which if you ever tried is you get the peel of a fruit, put in some sugar, muddle in, let it sit for a bit, and then it pulls the oils out of the peel and makes really nice syrup. And it adds a lot of complexity to it. And they figured out instead of diluting with tea, or instead of diluting with water, if you dilute with tea, you got a lot more flavor. So that's where they started building the complexity of cocktails and building depth and getting really creative and innovative instead of like your typical old fashioned or something. The fish house punch is exactly that. It's the one with the oleosaccharum and diluted with tea. A lot of famous people like Charles Dickens had a punch. He basically stole the fish house punch and lit it on fire and called it his own. So that is the Charles Dickens punch. It had rum, cognac, bourbon, and then oleosaccharum tea. And then Benjamin Franklin had his milk punch. And if you've never had a milk punch, it sounds gross, but it is really good. It is bourbon, milk. I like to put a little vanilla syrup in mine. You stir it up like an old fashioned, and it is really delicious. But Benjamin Franklin's recipe, I would not look up online because it is very booze heavy. It is booze with a splash of milk. It's not very good. Yeah. So we're going to be starting our first drink. I'm going to start with a bowl. This is how I roll through a party, and it is the best and only way to roll through a party. So I have a bunch of orange peels here. It's important when you're peeling your oranges not to get too much pith in there. The pith is super bitter. So this is, I'm thinking the way they made it back in the day. So originally, they would just get the peels, dump some sugar, muddle in, let it sit for a bit. Nowadays, with modern technology, if you are making this, throw in a Ziploc bag or even a vac seal, really great. If you need to make it really quick, throw it in a sous vide, 30 minutes on low setting, happens really quick, you get a really nice syrup. But old school style, we're doing raw sugar and orange peels. And muddling that in. And the longer you let this sit, the longer you're gonna get that depth of flavor, but for the sake of history and simplicity,
Is it making a flavored sugar or is it making a syrup?
It makes a syrup. So when you let it sit, especially in a sous vide, it's doesn't come out as just raw sugar and peels. It draws out the oils in it, and it makes like really slimy texture. It looks gross a little bit, but it has a super. The flavor is super deep. There's a weird complexity to it that you can't get in anything else. Really good way if you're gonna make your own limoncello or your own orange curacao is to use the peels of fruit. Actually, with a lot of cocktails, I like to do like grapefruit peel with Aperol, stuff like that. It just adds a underlying complexity and underlying like body to your drink that you wouldn't get anywhere else. Yeah, it's really difficult to describe until you actually try it before. And in they didn't have jiggers back then, so we're not going to measure anything today. But we got some sherry here and some brandy. So for the previous recipes, they would use peach brandy or apricot brandy. I'm going to be using a regular brandy here.
No measuring.
No measuring. This is exactly how I roll to a party. Is a bunch of bottles in a bowl. So, so I have apricot liqueur here in lieu of apricot brandy or peach brandy.
Roughly, what are the proportions though?
It depends how drunk you are. But I would say for one portion, I would do like two. If you're to make it just for yourself, 2 ounces of brandy, an entire orange. When you make oleosaccharum with the peel and the sugar, it's not very accurate and it's very hard to make it exactly the same. It kind of depends on how much oil is in it. So I always like to balance it to taste with simple syrup. So actually in my previous jobs, we had a daily house punch. And I was a barback at the time. My bartender would always ask me to make a house punch. I never knew the recipes. I didn't know how to do it. And his rule was just always make it tight. So that's exactly what I'm doing today is no measuring. And I'm just going to taste it and work from there. It's the proportions roughly, I would say, are 1 ounce to 2 ounces of brandy. Our total booze, I would say, is about 1 to 2 ounces. So if you're doing brandy, sherry, and apricot liqueur, in this case, I'm doing about 1.5 portions of brandy, about half a portion of sherry, and about half a portion of apricot liqueur. What I just poured in there is chilled black tea. Splash more. And then a bit of citrus, fresh lemon juice here. I have some fresh cold pressed pear juice here. That maybe is not so old school, but it's really delicious. And then, as we discussed before, so we have the booze. So we have the brandy, the sherry, and the apricot liqueur. For dilution, we have the tea, as we talked about before, and the pear juice. Citrus, we have the lemon juice, and I'm going to be putting a bit of orange bitters as well. Love to tell you it's an exact science, but that's the way to do it is taste your drink as you go.
And it's good to make in large batches.
Large batches, yeah. Yeah. If you are making this at home over a long duration or a long period, I would recommend actually putting your ice in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't dilute too much, but it keeps it cold. Give this a little stir. And taste my drink, of course. Pretty good, actually. Just adding a splash more pear juice, and I think we're good to go. All right. Bear with me. Drinks. And then for those of you on Zoom, that will be your cocktail number 1. If you are wanting some recipes, I I haven't written them down on the tasting map, but if you are wanting recipes for specific things, you can always just reach out, and I'm always happy to share more recipes. They're all in my head. I'm out of my head is the trick. If you have fresh fruit, and honestly, if your fruit's about to go bad, it's really great to throw it in the punch. What I do most of the time is make a cocktail out of it. Yeah, banana bread. What am I gonna do with banana bread? Toss in a punch. Yeah, priorities. Finally, someone that gets me. I am going to pour this in something easy to pour with. Make a mess. I made a mess. I did not think that through.
That was a challenging goal.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I thought about it afterwards. With a punch, you really don't need to stir or shake. A drink that has everything, including dilution. It doesn't need the aeration as well.
Do we know the moment when shaking started?
Not the exact moment, but when you look back at cocktails, we'll take a look at the timeline there. It looks about like mid 1800s is when they started shaking cocktails. Obviously, they didn't have the same tools we have today, so I don't imagine it's exactly the same. In terms of shaking and stirring cocktails, a lot of the questions I get is when do I shake a cocktail and when do I stir a cocktail? You don't want to shake a cocktail when you want to add air into the cocktail, which is typically when you have citrus juice. The very odd case is something like a Vesper Martini. I know a lot of members at our club really enjoy that cocktail. That's kind of the oddball that doesn't have any citrus that you shake. And the reason for that is simply because of the James Bond movie. That is the only reason why. And the story behind that is he asked for it shaken, not stirred, because supposedly wanted, well, it does sound cool. He supposedly wanted to look at the ice crystals, and if they were a different color, they would be poisoned. So if they were blue, he'd look at the ice crystals and yeah.
When did being a bartender become a job, like a career call? Because it must have been around the same time as that ad came out, where people started doing it, but maybe a little bit before.
Bartending as a job has always been around. It just hasn't been as serious as it was in terms of like actually mixing drinks and in terms of mixing drinks and shaking and stirring. I would say the same time around when Jerry Thomas invented his book is when it started happening. You can see like he had the full outfit, the tie. He was doing a bit of flair as well.
Yeah, you're not just pouring drinks now. It's a little bit more of an entertainment job. It's a different job. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just pouring drinks and just basic serving, as you can call it. But it started to get more and more intricate, especially after that book. Yeah, so that is very similar to what a fish house punch would be. Yeah, that's my take on it. Yeah, thank you. Is it one of those drinks you don't have to think too much about?
Well, that's probably dangerous too.
Oh yeah, very dangerous. If I'm going camping, I'll put it. I won't even put ice in a cooler. I'll just fill the entire cooler up with punch. Just call it a day. What do we think? Yeah. You ready for the next slide?
Just a second, I'm sorry. I thought somehow we got the text. Where's the text on? I'm just going to take that off.
I think it's that one.
Disable annotation.
Okay, but in the meantime, we'll talk about the Prohibition era. Did it work? No. So Prohibition era is really important to the cocktail scene. It's when they banned, like I was talking about earlier, when they banned all the palatable liquor, is when people started to get really creative, and that's where a lot of our favorite cocktails came from. A lot of the time they were using product that's been kind of hidden away, or they're made in a bathtub. A lot of the times you'll see Prohibition cocktails be gin based, simply because of the reason you don't have to age it. So mostly gin, not vodka, because gin was kind of the staple back then, especially gin and Genever. If you've ever had Genever, it tastes like a barrel aged gin. Yeah. So a lot of the cocktails you see that came out of there are like the Gin Ricky, Mint Julep, Tom Collins, Sidecar, White Lady, Whiskey Sour even. Obviously not with egg whites back then. The traditional way was without the egg whites. And then Prohibition, if you're not familiar, started because of the rampant overconsumption of alcohol, and men were getting a little crazy. In Canada, however, wasn't that big of a deal. But what we did get out of it was our lovely liquor lockers upstairs.
Came with a Prohibition big club. That's cool.
There's a lot of history in this club that I didn't really think about when I first got here. So for Prohibition era in Vancouver, that we'll talk about later, the reason why we have those liquor lockers is you need a prescription to be prescribed liquor for medicine. A lot of the times they were drinking alcohol as medicine, but it was very easy to get the prescriptions. You can just walk in, especially in Canada. So it wasn't too big of a deal, yeah.
It's very interesting about the wine industry, because at the time that Prohibition was just about to be enacted, everyone making wine in California in particular had no, they did not believe that wine would be part of it, right? Wine was civilized. Wine was what Thomas Jefferson drank. It was not the source of all these evils, and they were shocked when wine was included. But a lot of wine was still neat.
Yeah, same with alcohol too, I believe, and like a lot of bathtub gin is, from what I hear, that's where a lot of the Tom Collins and maybe not the Sidecar, but White Lady and Gin Ricky, those cocktails are really important to where cocktails derive from. They're kind of the basis of where people started making twists on things, and yeah, that's kind of the start of it. So for our second drink, we have the Hemingway Daiquiri. So this cocktail is really near and dear to my heart, because at first I really hated it until I played around with it for about a month, and I kind of figured out the recipe that is the most palatable. So Ernest Hemingway, as everyone knows, is famous for his writing and drinking. So this cocktail was created when he went to Cuba, and he was drinking daiquiris nonstop there, and he asked the bartender for something that had no sugar. He wanted more dry, more sour, and a lot more booze. So he asked for no sugar and double the rum, and it originally was called the Papa Doble, but then it evolved into the Hemingway Daiquiri with the addition of maraschino liqueur and grapefruit juice. So originally it was just a bunch of rum with a splash of lime juice, which not the greatest, but we will get working on that cocktail here for
Really the only ingredients that would have been in it.
rum and lime
So
juice.
we take the sugar out.
Yeah, just a bunch of rum and lime juice. Yeah, right. Yeah. Martinis, Negronis, anything with Campari. He was really into absinthe, of course. If you aren't familiar with absinthe, it does not make you hallucinate. Correct me if I'm wrong, DJ, but I believe that rumor started from people drinking absinthe that was distilled in copper pots, and there was some sort of copper poisoning, and that's why they were hallucinating.
It's not clear whether it's that or the Touchon, which is a component in the wormwood. But if you had to have an enormous amount of it to have any toxic effect, we seem to think that it was just very, very poor distillation. A lot of the heads and the tails, because the hat wasn't careful, and you just had a lot of diesel oils and a lot of really noxious substances in it because it was being clumsily and rustically distilled. Hemingway also loved wine.
Oh, okay.
He named his daughter Marco after Chateau Marco. That's how he loved her.
Well, if you do want to follow along how we're making this cocktail, this one has 1.5 ounces of rum, a 1/4 ounce of maraschino liqueur.
No cherries.
No cherries. She made me bring in red cherries for her. I hate those red cherries.
We know.
Yeah, hate them. And then we have cold pressed grapefruit juice. So 1 ounce of this. This is a cocktail you want to shake, so if you have a shaker, for those of you on Zoom.
So what made you hate this?
Every recipe you look up online just really sucks. It's just it's either super dry or super sweet, too much maraschino. It just always felt off. And I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. Turns out it was the maraschino. It's a lot of the recipes put I think 1/2 ounce, 1/4 to 1/2 ounce. I'm using 1/4 ounce, but way less lime juice. And it was, if you ever looked up what a Hemingway Daiquiri was, it's supposed to be super boozy and super sour. And I think that's kind of how the palate has evolved nowadays. Is it went from back in the day, I'd say like 90s. It was very sweet palates, and it kind of evolved into more dry and sour palates, which kind of is how my palate evolved as well.
I sometimes drink rum and lime.
Rum and lime, just straight lime juice. Oh my! That is how the daiquiri was invented, supposedly. Yeah, when they had barrels of rum and they were all getting scurvy, they tossed some lime juice in there because they figured out lime juice would cure the scurvy, and that's how daiquiri was supposedly invented. Yeah, they couldn't just drink the lime juice because that would be ridiculous. And part of the noise here. This one has the grapefruit juice and the lime juice. If you ever stir a Hemingway Daiquiri, it will be the most vile thing you've ever tasted. If you stir them, it will be the most vile thing you've tasted.
So it has to be shaken.
It has to be shaken.
What is the effect of air on citrus?
They call it bruising the citrus, but it opens the flavor up in terms of like the palate and the blending of flavors. It kind of rounds everything together. When you add citrus juice on its own without shaking, this is kind of the tough part when you're doing like a banquets event and they want a batch cocktail with citrus. It's very difficult because everything tastes sharp. You can taste every individual flavor. So in this cocktail, you would actually be able to taste grapefruit juice, lime juice, maraschino, and everything just feels separated. When you shake it and you open up and add air, it kind of melds all the flavors together and doesn't taste so sharp. If you are ever batching a cocktail with citrus at home, the trick I found is adding a bit of salt. I don't know why it works, but it does work. And
adding a bit of salt.
Yeah.
Chef, you know why that would help?
I mean, the only thing I could think of would be just kind of the changes the way the sweet flavors that are in there.
It's helping everything around.
Yeah, I could.
Just wants it to you know, the aeration, wine in barrels has that very, very same effect where there's some gentle often when you're not shaking it, it's not violet, but you're going to give it time and it has a good harmonizing effect. What's your best shaking hand or side?
Definitely my right side, mostly because my suit is too tight and I'm right-handed.
Your suit is too tight.
If you ever
Shaking muscles.
if you ever see me shake with two hands, it's because I don't have my jacket on. It's every bartender has their own rhythm of shaking. Shaking is very stylistic choice. For me, it's more practical. So if you ever see me shake with two hands, I used to shake to look cool. I used to shake with that. It evolved into shaking with my arms as straight as possible because my wrists were starting to go away. You'll see a lot of bartenders, especially I've been bartending for like 20, 30 years, they'll start to do that as well. A lot of them will do the cactus club shake, I like to call, up and down. If you ever go to Cactus Club, it stresses me out. Yeah. They also do the.
Can you overshake?
You can overshake. I think that's the biggest difference in when you make a cocktail at home and versus cocktail when you have a cocktail at a bar. Is you can follow the exact same recipe and it's going to taste a little bit different. And the reason for that is bartenders are trained to match the temperature and dilution levels of a cocktail, and that's what really makes the biggest difference. If you overshake, you over dilute a cocktail, there's too much water. If you use the ice I'm using in here has been sitting here for a little. It's been sitting in an ice machine, so it's tempered. So when I pour liquids onto the ice, it doesn't immediately crack. It's chilled out a bit, but when you take ice out of your freezer and you make a cocktail and try to shake it immediately, the ice will crack and your cocktail will get way too cold and not diluted nearly enough. So every time I make a cocktail at home, I'll often let it sit, the ice sit out in the sink for a little bit. That's the biggest difference when you're making a cocktail versus home and versus having it at a bar.
That's the most fun fact I've heard all.
That's a mistake. That's great.
Yeah. If you have large cubes at home too, it's nice to just leave them out and then you just give them a crack before you shake or stir, and it's kind of the way to go if you're making cocktails at home. Yeah. So that is the Hemingway Daiquiri. It's
Tangy.
yeah, nice and tangy like he intended. Maybe not as much alcohol because it is illegal in BC.
This is like the Chablis of cocktails.
What's that? Yes. So the glasses you serve a cocktail in are not only for a presentation, but so when you serve a glass, very much like wine, when you serve a glass in a cocktail in a coupe glass, you ideally want to grab by the stem not to warm the cocktail. So it's not only a stylistic choice, but a practical choice. If you're serving something in a Ross glass, it's going to get warmed up really quick. The only oddball cocktail that we will run into shortly is the Sazerac cocktail. So the Sazerac, for those of you that don't know, is almost as old as the old fashioned, made very similarly, water, bitters, booze. It's served in a Ross glass without ice. It's made with ice, but served without ice, and the garnish is tossed away. It's a very just straightforward drink. Personally, my favorite drink. The first time I had it, I drank only Sazeracs for 1.5 years. I've tried every Sazerac in Vancouver, every bartender. I've had all of them. Every variation too. That cocktail is really cool. It's we'll look into it a little bit more later, but it's you can have it with rye or cognac, but it's one of those oddballs like the Vesper that breaks the rules of. It's a drink that you have to drink quick, but you will drink quick because there's not too much liquid in it. But it will warm up really quick if you take your time with it. So it's typically with, I would say, more citrus-based cocktails, they usually serve it on ice because you can account for the dilution like that. A lot of the times when you're shaking a cocktail that's going to be served on ice, I'll put way more ice in the shaker so that it cools faster than it dilutes. So once it's served on ice, it catches up in dilution. I like to say the perfect time for a cocktail that's served on ice is about the halfway point. So yeah, glassware does matter besides the stylistic choice. So now we're looking at the 20th century. So during that time, after the World War as well, tiki culture kept the culture of cocktails alive. So that's Don Beach and all the tiki drinks that came with it. And then the cocktail culture kind of took a pause in the 60s and 70s. It was taken over by drug cultures and all the hippies. And then when it came back, it started popularizing the cocktail dinners, the cocktail parties, the cocktail dresses. If you're not familiar with 3 martini lunch, it was more of like a status symbol where a lot of like business people would sit down and have 3 martinis with their lunch. And it was just to show that they could.
It came back in the 90s as well.
Yeah, I did it.
Remember that plot, like, still in Calgary, if you go to the Stampede, there's gin breakfasts, and that's kind of like a callback to that. Where,
We need to bring back the cocktail dresses. Look here. Makes me want to watch Mad Men right now.
I just have 3 martinis at my lunch regularly, but that's besides the point.
But there are books called the 3 Martini Punch and movies and it was an entity.
So yeah, along this period of time is when the cocktails like the old fashioned, the Manhattan martinis came to life. A lot of those cocktails were booze forward. And then this is kind of where the culture of bartending follows the trends that people's palates evolve into. And during this time, it was very sweet oriented. So if you think back to 80s, 90s cocktails, very sweet, a lot of syrup, a lot of mixes, so sour mixes. They were trying to be more practical than be more balanced. And that's kind of where these guys in the 90s came through. So Dale de Graaf, if you've not heard of him, he is the king of cocktails. He's often in Vancouver actually for competitions. And then you have people like Jeffrey Morgenthaler, Jim Meehan, Jamie Boudreau is actually from Vancouver, moved to Seattle to open Cannon, really great cocktail bar if you've never been. So these are the guys that kind of paved the way for the modern cocktail scene. A lot of the time with these guys, they brought back like the history and the trying to balance a cocktail and bringing it back to its old roots. And they also brought in the service aspect of bartending. So along the way, the service aspect of bartending got lost. And if you ever meet Dale de Graaf, he's the most hospitable person you'll ever meet in your life. Genuinely a really nice and warm guy. And that was always his motto was, it doesn't matter how good you can make a drink. It's if people want to sit at your bar, then you're doing your job correctly. And that's what makes a good bartender. So that's kind of the culture that those bartenders in the 90s paved the way for. And then it's had a really big resurgence. That's why a lot of the times, especially in the past like 10, 20 years, you see a lot of people bringing back old cocktails that have been forgotten. Something like the Sazerac probably wasn't on menus 10, 20 years ago, but it's all coming back. And we're at a point now where it's evolving and people are reinterpreting those. But for a while, because they actually, these bartenders brought the importance of history and tradition to bartending, a lot of bartenders didn't touch it. They just said, this is tradition, we're purists, we're gonna leave it at that. But nowadays you see people breaking those barriers and breaking the rules and really reinventing cocktails that have been left alone for a while. It paved the way for us now.
Did the Tom Cruise movie have a big impact on the world of cocktails?
I would say, especially the martinis, the Vesper Martini. I still to this day always hear shaken not stirred. Movie culture did have a really big impact on the scene as well. It became less, it helped transition the way from tiki drinks, which is kind of where the sweet culture of cocktails and where people's palates lean towards, and evolved into more nuanced and more classy cocktails as people were perceiving as like the martinis and Manhattans, old fashions. Yeah.
But in the revival of this, there was a real reverence for the original, like the true original recreation of the cocktail. And then we started to be experimental.
Yeah, I would say every bartender goes through that period in their career where they are purists and they don't touch traditions. They look up the oldest recipe and follow that and say, this is the only way to make it. You only make your old fashions with a sugar cube. I use simple syrup, I don't really care. It's sugar and water, right? It's yeah, every bartender goes through that, and now we're kind of breaking the way. So looking at the timeline of cocktails, very first cocktail that was officially titled is the old fashioned, so early 1800s. Like we talked about earlier, basic sugar, water, bitters, alcohol, stirred down. Obviously, it wasn't as intricate as it is now. And a lot of these cocktails, when I say bartenders went through like a purist phase, that's where my style of bartending evolved from. Is I really like nuanced cocktails like this, and the next slide you'll see the Sazerac. It's cocktails that are on paper really easy to make, but it's all the nuances and all the details that really make it different and make it better.
Which one is your favorite?
I've drinking so many of them. Yeah, I can still drink these all day. I drank only Sazeracs for a good year and a half. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
And what was your favorite bar in Vancouver?
She doesn't work there anymore, but at the time, Uva was when it was ran by Sabrine Dollywall. Yeah, she did great cocktails, and she really led the movement of like bringing female bartenders to the scene and really highlighting their skill set. So her, Lily, and Jasmine, I think two of them are at Chickadee Room now. But Lauren Moat, yep, she won world class, I believe, and she is still paving the way for cocktails. If you look up, if you ever Google most popular cocktails in Vancouver or created in Vancouver, you'll see the Chartreuse Milkshake, created by Miss Lauren Moat. Very complicated. Oh yeah, she has her own line of bitters as well, and her Chartreuse Milkshake cocktail is, I think it's like 8 or 9 ingredients. It's crazy complicated, but it tastes amazing. Yeah, you can find. I think Sabrina is still at Chickadee Room with Lily. Yeah, she's doing really cool things there.
Remind us what's in the Sazerac.
Sazerac is rye, patient bitters, sugar, stirred down with a lemon peel. That lemon peel actually shouldn't be there. We call it a blind swath. Toss it after. The Sazerac was originally made in New Orleans with cognac, but at the time, obviously, they didn't have enough cognac. So they started using rye as a substitute, and that's what it's kind of evolved into now.
So it's an old fashioned, it's using rye as a base instead.
Rye and different types of bitters. And it also has the spray absinthe around the glass, or you wash the glass in absinthe.
Oh.
Yeah, so it has a nice aroma to it. Pim's Cup, I think everyone's familiar with in the 1840s. And we can just move on to the next one, I think. I didn't have too much to say about this. I don't know. Not for me. See, I thought it wasn't. I always thought it wasn't that exciting until I put it on the menu last summer and everyone was ordering it. And apparently I don't know what I'm talking about. Brandy Crusta, also a fantastic drink, also on our menu. So if you'd like to try it at the club. This one was also one of the cocktails like the Hemingway Daiquiri that I first made and absolutely hated. It was the weird balance of too dry with the maraschino, and I just couldn't figure it out. Eventually I did. It's a really interesting cocktail because it has very specific way you're supposed to design it. And it's one of the cocktails you don't really mess with in that sense because it's what makes a Brandy Crusta. So it has a big sugar rim and a big orange peel that's shaped, when you look at it from the top, looks like a rose. So it goes around the entire glass. So in this case, it's one of the identity is in the appearance. So it's a cocktail even I don't like to mess with too much, minus a recipe because all the recipes online are way too sweet. This one I really like to put up because it, so this picture in particular is the Martinez. The Martinez is made with sweet vermouth and maraschino. It was the predecessor to a martini. Back then, sweet vermouth was more readily available, and this is where the martini originated from. Like we were talking about Sabrina as well earlier, her husband Jazz has, if you ask any bartender in Vancouver what a jazz Martinez is. He has his very own specific recipe. I personally don't like it too much, but not for me. But it is one of those cocktails that if you've never tried, you definitely should, just to see where a martini came from. And one of those cocktails you can really substitute the gin in it for anything. So this cocktail back in 1860s was made with Old Tom gin, which a lot of bars don't carry too much anymore, but it's such a diverse recipe. You can really swap it out in and out with anything.
So Old Tom gin is wood aged.
Yeah.
So it's going to give it a different flavor altogether.
Yeah.
When did eggs come into cocktails?
I'd say about the time Pisco Sours probably started getting popular. And the martini, that was just to prove a point. Back to the egg white thing though, if you ever order a whiskey sour was originally not with egg whites. With egg whites, it's actually called a Boston sour. If you take out the egg whites and add red wine to that, it's called a New York sour. And then if you add egg whites and red wine, it's called the Greenwich sour. So we've just kind of taken all that apart and just called the whiskey sour with egg whites, just a whiskey sour.
And it has to be real eggs, right?
It has to be real eggs.
Not stuff in a carton.
Sometimes it's stuff in the cart.
So if I went in somewhere and learned about Boston sour, you know what I was talking about?
Oh, they have no idea. Just, yeah, or whiskey sour. Boston sour is just the whiskey sour with egg whites. Yeah. It's like an old fashioned. There's a very specific type of old fashioned, like a Wisconsin old fashioned is terrible drink. Never order it, but it's
Can I explain to us, or
yeah.
there is my thought, why would you put the egg whites or anything like this?
Yeah.
This must be alcoholic. What is the reason for that?
So the purpose of egg white, you can think of it more as like a meringue. It adds a nice like silky texture to the cocktail when it emulsifies. I'll give you a cocktail with egg whites next time. I'll prove you wrong.
I love them.
It adds like a nice silky, like soft texture to the drink. And in palate wise, it kind of miles the flavor down. It's not as sharp. So when you think of drinks with egg whites, you think sours and fizzes. Fizz has, what's that?
I can always smell them. They overpower the drink.
Yeah, so if you can smell the egg whites, that means the bartender put too much egg whites in it, to be honest. And there are substitutes for that now. Who is it? You sent me the miracle foamer, miraculous foamer.
Yeah.
They have substitutes for that. Also, you can use aquafaba, which is a fancy bartender way of saying chickpea water. Yeah, it's really good. Really good in the cocktail. You don't notice the smell as much as egg whites, but it does freak some people out. But you just call it aquafaba, so it doesn't freak you out. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
Because you can whip it.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like it emulsifies very similar to egg whites. Yeah. My personal favorite sour drink is a daiquiri. It's what a lot of bartenders, including myself, if they've never been to a bar before, they'll walk up before they look at the menu, they just order a daiquiri, then look at the menu, they'll try the daiquiri. You can really tell a bartender's palate and their style of cocktails that they're about to make you. Yeah, if it's on the sour side, you know, if it's too sweet, if it's exactly balanced, you know exactly what to expect. If I don't like it, I'll just order beer. Yeah, if a bartender ever orders a cocktail from you and then a beer afterwards, you really messed up. Happened to me when I first started.
So this is the litmus test.
It is a litmus test, yeah. Also the heartbreaking test. And then the 1900s, you have a lot of your Negronis, French 75s, the zombie cocktail, espresso martinis, now seen at every bar. But yeah, these are all cocktails that have been made a while ago and are still alive and well. If you see on the very bottom left there, I put the margarita there on purpose, also to prove a point. The margarita on ice came before the blended margarita. Yeah, it's a very classic way to drink a margarita. I think that's what most people prefer now.
Yes.
And I think it's before that, before my time, before I could drink, my dad would always talk about slushy margaritas, and that's the proper way to drink a margarita. So I think we've kind of brought it back to its old tradition. I'm very happy about it. The way I drink my margaritas as well is super tart, super crisp, super dry, and just super refreshing. I think that's what a margarita should be. Oh,
Salt or no salt?
half salt.
Half salt.
So you get a choice. Yeah.
And Boulevardier or Negroni?
Ooh. Boulevardier, but I'm a sucker for whiskey, so yeah.
Both very good.
And I think you and I had the same experience with Campari our first time, or Negroni. First time I tried a Negroni, I wanted to vomit. I hated it, despised it. Yeah, it was so bitter, I couldn't stand it. And then the worst part was the week after, it was Negroni week, and all the bartenders in the city decided to come to my bar that night. And it was the first night I learned to stir 3 cocktails in each hand. And I've never hated Negronis more in my life.
So what's your experience in the bar? 50-50 Boulevardier Negroni or?
More Negronis. I think Negronis are more known. People that I think have gotten sick of Negronis will move to the Boulevardier. You can kind of tell that. A modern classic is what I would consider the last head bartender I worked with, he made something called an Inception Negroni. So it was a classic Negroni trapped inside of an ice sphere, served on top of a white Negroni, which is now a modern classic, invented in New York. So you get 2 types of Negroni, and as it melts, you get a blend. So you get the white Negroni is a bit sweeter, and then you get a blend of the bitterness in there. And that whole process took us like, I think, 5 or 6 months to figure out. We just tried every different tool, how to make it perfect. And then when the Negroni mix would freeze, it becomes a slushy.
Should we do it here?
We can do it here. Just give me 2 months.
Owen's shaking his head.
Just give me 2 months and a towel to cry into. So we mentioned it briefly, but Vancouver and cocktails, it wasn't affected as much in the Prohibition, and which leads us to the first ever bar by John Gassy Jack Dayton. He had a bar in US Minister, and he created the Globe Saloon, I believe in Gastown, as the first ever bar or saloon. And I think everyone is familiar with John Gassy Jack Dayton, but yeah. Prohibition actually in Canada started in Vancouver. So there was it had to do with a lot of racism to the Chinese people and to the Indian people, specifically the Chinese, because there was a lot of opium usage in Chinatown, which they were forced to stay in and do their business and live in. So Mackenzie King was who became prime minister later and started the Prohibition. He started the Opium Act in 1908 and 1920, the Opium and Narcotic Drug Act. It was, like we talked about earlier, very easy to bypass. All you really need is a prescription, which every doctor would like, okay, you have cough, bottle of Fernet. And that's why the liquor lockers are at the Terminal City Club nowadays. Yeah.
I still get a prescription for alcohol.
Yep. Upstairs, whenever I'm working, you let me know. I'll sign you up.
Before that, you could get prescriptions for alcohol, like prior to Prohibition, it was actually a common script that they would write. This is around the same time that you could also get prescribed cocaine and opium pretty freely. So, it's kind of an interesting time for doctors.
Yeah, and I think that is why the liquor lockers came into here, because the only way to bypass it was through those prescriptions. And alcohol has been used for medicine, and it still stands to this day, I think, emotionally. Vancouver became a hotspot for hospitality, tourism, and entertainment. We had like a lot of famous artists coming and performing at the many venues that are still standing to this day.
The Sylvia.
Yeah, the Sylvia is very important in the cocktail culture. So the next cocktail we're actually going to make ties it all together. So the Sylvia Hotel was rumored to make a cocktail called the Vancouver Cocktail, which is gin, sweet vermouth and Benedictine. They used French sweet vermouth, and that became known as Vancouver Cocktail, but somewhere it got lost in translation, where it was actually made with Italian vermouth. And Vancouver Club just next door actually invented the cocktail called Fitchit, which was with the Italian vermouth, and they just never got credit for it until recently. So that is our next cocktail that we'll be making.
So clearly, I mean, in the spirit of competition, we obviously made our own cocktail.
Oh yeah.
So you've been working.
Yeah, I'm just seeing what cocktail they have made. I'm just gonna change one ingredient and then call it mine and give them another 50 years and then catch up.
Can't let this stand.
All right, so Vancouver Cocktail, very easy to make. Also very similar to something like a Martinez. We don't have too many iconic cocktails in history that have been created in Vancouver. There were a lot that were debunked, something like The Last Word. And Ted Saussier's, that book is used, the Bottoms Up book is referred to a lot for historically checking dates for when cocktails were first referenced. The Last Word, for example, was supposedly made at the Hotel Georgia. Turns out it was made in Detroit, and we just stole another one. So added to the list. This cocktail is 2 parts of gin. Do this in 2 batches here. We're going to use Italian sweet vermouth. We're using the.
And what's the difference between Italian sweet vermouth? Sorry, you gotta tell us, right?
So it's just different flavor. Like this one in particular, the Capano Antica formula is something I like to use for cocktails that are stirred, like the Vancouver Cocktail. It's not crazy herbal and crazy bold, but it rounds it off. This one in particular has a bit more herbalness than something like a Cinzano. Yeah, it just blends. I personally, you can't really find French vermouth in Vancouver too much, but yeah, BC chooses for me, you know. We're doing an ounce per cocktail. And this cocktail only has a splash of Benedictine. Benedictine is an old French liqueur. It is very herbal. Tastes like, it really does taste like medicine. It's one of those old liqueurs like green chartreuse and a lot of the Amaros that were used as medicine, taste like medicine. You don't see it in cocktails too much, actually. This is a really difficult ingredient to work with. Now, stirring a cocktail, for those of you that like to make cocktails at home, stirring cocktails is probably the more difficult out of the two between stirring and shaking, because your ice really does matter a lot. And when you let your ice not temper and pull it straight out of the fridge, it cracks and chills it down way too much. And you can really tell the difference because everything's not aerated, and you can really taste the lack of dilution. And if you ever look at something like an old fashioned that's made in like banquet style that's batched, they add about 40% extra volume of water just to make it palatable. And that really does make the biggest difference. Very easy to mess up to because of your ice. Usually my rule is if it's chilled to the touch, it's good. The Japanese have a very strict way of doing it. Japanese bartenders, for something like the Japanese highball, they'll stir 13.5 times clockwise and then 3.5 times counterclockwise, and it has to be a specific size of ice and a specific glass temperature. So stirring cocktails can get very intricate and very complicated, but for the most part, if your glass is chilled to the touch, it is probably diluted enough. Another thing to note is you'll see a lot of bartenders hold it by the bottom. And the reason for that is not only to let it not slip, but if you're holding it here, I see a lot of new people when they make drinks, they hold it like this, warms the drink up way too fast. Yeah. So not an overly complicated cocktail. No. Completely different type of vermouth. Yeah, so any type of sweet vermouth would be fine. So even something like a cheaper Cinzano Rosso is, I think, like $15 in the liquor store. That's kind of my go-to when I make drinks at home personally, because it's cheap and easy. But white vermouth, Bianco vermouth is going to be a completely different flavor. That would be used in something like a Vesper Martini. Vesper Martini. Vesper Martini. So Vesper Martini is the James Bond cocktail we're talking about earlier, shaken and stirred. Gin, vodka, lillet. Instead of lillet, you can do Martini Bianco. I personally like to use that style of vermouth in lieu of something like a sherry, just to kind of balance the body and mouthfeel of a cocktail more than the actual flavor. I think that's what bartending has kind of evolved into now, is less so the flavors, because I think every twist and variation of cocktails has been done now, but it's more so focusing on mouthfeel and characteristics of like how wine has tannins and stuff like that. Cocktail culture has always been a little behind on and following wine culture in that sense. When wines got dry, so did cocktails. Now we're focusing on mouthfeel, body, and texture, and that's kind of the direction cocktails are going now. I don't like to call any cocktail that I create an original, because it's probably been done 100 times in the world. But what I can control is mouthfeel and texture, which is something like a Bianco vermouth or a sherry does for me. You can use it to be the star, but in small amounts, it really does make a difference.
Have you ever participated in any cocktail competition or interested in it?
I have. I've done a few for different types of companies there that have brand competitions. One for Ocean I did, a twist on like a blood and sand. Speed competitions. Me and my friend were actually going to do a duo competition. So our last job, we were the service bartenders, where we would make like 600 drinks all in one go. And it's a competition called the Speedy Gonzales, where each bartender has a minute. You guys have a big chit of drinks, all different drinks, and you take turns and see which team can make the best drink and the fastest drink. I personally like speed cocktails or speed cocktail competitions more, mostly because it's I can't sit still. A lot of the cocktail competitions that are taken more seriously, however, are things like the world class, a lot of the Diageo competitions, and those are more presentation style. So a lot of public speaking, so count me out of those. But it's presenting a cocktail in a way that is stylistic to you and represents your background and what you want to feature in that cocktail. So when you get to something like the world classes in the finals, they actually get to build their own bar setup and everything. Yeah, that is the Fitchett cocktail that everyone found too late. Served with the olive or cherry. If you ever try with an olive, it is really disgusting.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. If you have it with the cherry at the club, if you have it with our cherry, those are the cherries that I pitted for 6 hours. So I hope they taste good. Yeah. What do we think of the cocktail? Something different? Not something you taste very often, especially with the Benedictine. Yeah, definitely a sipping style cocktail. I always like to say, this is what I like to tell my bartenders as well, is when someone asks like, what cocktail should I get? It's not like, what cocktail do you like, or what do you like? It's more so like, what are you in the mood for? And a lot of time that the first thing I narrow down is, are you in the mood for something like a sipping cocktail like this, like more take your time with it, enjoy it, or do you want something more like light and bright and exciting, more something like a margarita style cocktail? And that's kind of what I work towards. Yeah, so that is the Vancouver cocktail. Yeah. Combination of both. Yeah. So this vermouth in particular, I like for this because it balances the Benedictine. And when you use something a bit more bland and like Cinzano, the Benedictine tastes a bit more astringent, and you can really notice it a lot more when you blend it in with something it has like the herbal and pronounced spice notes, but not overwhelmingly. It blends it really well. Yeah.
Is that easy to find?
This one is easy to find. Yes, it's in the liquor store. It's a bit more pricey, but it's, yeah. If you're making cocktails and toss in the fridge, it'll last quite a long time. Yeah. So this is kind of what we've been talking about the entire time, is the evolution of cocktail culture. We talked about the palate and how it went from sweet with the tiki culture and evolved into more dry, and now we're playing with texture and complexity, body, different layers of flavors. And it's one gripe of mine that was the past 5 or so years, is a lot of cocktail bars and a lot of bartenders, they figured out what balanced was, and every cocktail they made was just balanced. And there was nothing else to them. It was just a bunch of flavors that were balanced. And it was very uninteresting. I actually lost a lot of interest in cocktails because of that. I started leaning towards stuff that stood out. So a cocktail that was sweet or a cocktail that was sour actually made me interested. And I think a lot of bartenders now are figuring, like we talked about earlier, like the body and the texture and the mouthfeel and how that adds to it. And if a cocktail is supposed to be sweet, let it be sweet. And that's what I do with a lot with my menus as well. When I'm designing cocktails for the club, is I like to have something that's sweet and is more complex, or I'll have a cocktail that's more sour, but a bit more less complexity, a bit more basic, more easily palatable, something more adventurous. And designing and curating cocktails in that sense can be super complicated and super frustrating at times, but it keeps it a lot more interesting. And I think that's what stands out to me as a good cocktail versus I could go to any cocktail bar in the city and have a balanced cocktail. And I think everyone's getting a little, I know I am, but getting a little bored of it.
Balanced but interesting.
Balanced but interesting, yeah. It gets to the point where it can just melt together.
When did you start working? Or actually, when did you start?
I joined the bar. So I actually got a phone call for a job interview for a bellman. I just turned 19 a week before. They asked if I have my full license. I'm like, nope, I just turned 19. So they're like, okay, well, do you want a job as a bar back? And I was Googling what a bar back was on my phone because I've never been to a bar before. No idea what it was. I was like, yeah, sure, take it. I just was Googling the bar. I had no clue what the bar was. My very first shift, I think everyone wanted to fire me because I had never worked in a service industry job before. I was carrying like 2 shot glasses, looking down, walking really slow. And like people would be bumping into me. I'd be like behind and just whispering everywhere. Yeah, start from somewhere. I got yeah, it's a tough industry to get into in that sense, but it's I jumped in kind of feet first and it was sink or swim.
How long ago was that?
Oh, not too long ago. Not too long ago. I don't need a, I don't need a, yeah, it was a long time ago. 20 years ago, back in the day.
Mixed a lot of cocktails.
I have mixed a lot of cocktails. Particularly my last place was Prohibition at Hotel Georgia. The people that curated the bar program there, Robin and Brad, they have been doing this for a lifetime, and they really pushed me in a sense of figuring it out on my own and figuring out my own style. There's never a wrong way or right way to do it, but yeah, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So our last drink is a Clarified Punch. It's something I wanted to kind of bring together in a sense, full circle, because this is introducing those type of techniques that we are seeing more regularly now. Like clarifying a cocktail is actually milk washing a cocktail, forcing it to curdle, bringing it actually binds with a lot of the tannins in the alcohol and creates a lot softer and more mellow flavor. You'll be tasting a rum-based milk punch today. We have a bourbon milk punch based cocktail in our on our menu as well with the Earl Grey foam. That I was actually inspired by London Fog, but this one actually is a batch that Malcolm made not too long ago, just a couple of days ago. And he told me to try it. I really loved it. He made it more of a liqueur style. It's a very difficult process. It takes extremely long time. Usually it takes me about 5 days or so. If you really want a pure product. So this has, I show zoom as well. It's a clear liquid. If it has a tint of yellow or a tint of orange, it typically comes from whatever additions he put into it, or the type of liqueur. So in this case, he used a Wray & Nephew, and if you see on the bourbon sours that are clarified, they're a bit more clear because I didn't add too much lemon juice into mine either. So this one we're doing 1.5 ounces of the Wray & Nephew milk punch. You'll taste as well. The Wray & Nephew is an overproof rum, so it's supposed to be really bold and in your face. But when you add the milk and force it to curdle and strain it for 5 days, in this case, I think Malcolm actually left it for 10 days. Really creates an interesting product, and I really like the way cocktail culture is going with techniques like this because it actually is more sustainable. This will last in your fridge for a month or two. A lot of the trends right now is going towards more of a sustainability and just using ingredients that you typically throw out. So you'll see a lot of pineapple peels being made into oleosaccharum, banana peels as well make really good oleosaccharum. And shelf-stable stuff like this, and making your own cordials and tinctures that are really interesting and have a lot of depth and flavor, but will last on your shelf for a long time. If you ever have worked in a large-scale bar or restaurant, you'll know how much gets tossed out. And I think the trend is getting to a point where we don't have to worry about that too much. My friend just opened a bar in Korea, and his entire platform and his whole concept is building cocktails that are shelf stable. So he makes all different types of tinctures and everything. And the process of making the drink takes maybe like 1 or 2 minutes to actually make the cocktail, but the prep work takes about like a week. So it's a lot of behind the scenes work. A lot of bars right now, nowadays as well, the current trend right now is buying a lot of expensive equipment. Like a rotovap and distilling their own liquor and different types of liqueur. It's not like a 20-30 grand piece of equipment, but you get to actually play with your own spirits and focus on different depths of flavor that you aren't limited to all this. Not allowed to do that in BC, of course, unless I get a license for it. What's that?
You have to talk. I think you have an ethanol license.
Ethanol license. Okay. Okay. Say no more. This one, so he made a liqueur style rum, overproof rum. This one I mixed with a splash of lemon juice and a splash of Amaro Nonino. If you're not familiar with Amaro Nonino, it is more of a lighter style Amaro. It is sweetened with caramel. So you get a lot of those sweet notes from it as well, but it's balanced well with the lemon juice.
What are you removing with the milk?
What's that?
When you curdle the milk and take it out, what are you removing from the?
So it's a lot of the proteins in the milk, and when they curdle with the either acid or alcohol. So in this case, you use overproof rum because it has not high enough alcohol content. Yeah.
And what's the Amaro?
This one is the
Sorry, we don't actually know what that is.
Amaro Nonino. If you've ever had a paper plane, it has this in it. Yeah. So it is more of like a light to medium style Amaro. We did a Amaro Zoom class not too long ago, but has the primary characters in it is it has the bitterness of an Amaro, but not as much. It's more sweetened with caramel and orange notes as well. So this is a a dangerous one because don't taste all the alcohol, but it will get you there fast. And you definitely want to.
Well, we're 3/4 there, so.
Yeah, I was supposed to make half portion cocktails, but it didn't really end up like that. I had to do math in my head and I just didn't want to do half portion. So. I'm getting some fresh nutmeg on here as well. This is kind of a throwback to a modern day old school punch. So it has the spice from the nutmeg. Oleosaccharum would be the sweetener in the booze, in the milk, clarified milk, and bitters, orange bitters in here as well. So has all the components, just really fast to make. Yeah. I'll let one pass those out for you.
So is it trending more towards cocktails that can be made elsewhere, like more unique ones, like people are focused on making their own bitters?
I think bartenders are just bored of using the same ingredients over and over.
More for selection.
Yeah, I think when you first start bartending, you get inspired by different ingredients. Like, oh, I'm gonna use Campari today, and then you find something else. Like, oh, I just discovered Amaros. Let's play with those. After you've done everything, it's how can I keep continuing to improve and evolve in my style of bartending, but keep it interesting. And I think that's where the distilling your own liquor and doing rotovaps and all that.
Do we have a liquid nitrogen tank?
We do not. Liquid nitrogen and dry ice are two things that I'm very worried about. Because dry ice, if you swallow, obviously, is very dangerous. Those are a bit tricky. It's also a little bit taboo in a sense of bartending world. It's like the activated charcoal. Apparently, people have some reactions to it. So these bartenders stopped using it. Yeah, I don't know how true it is, but we heard there were reactions and we stopped using it recently.
Liquid nitrogen is pretty nice to react a lot, especially at the temperature. As you reduce the reaction temperature, obviously the number of reactions that are energetically stable reduces quite
Right.
quickly.
Right.
So at the temperature, liquid nitrogen is there. The only thing you get to react, if they were going to react, would be so energetic.
Oh, sorry, I was talking about the activated charcoal.
Oh, actually,
Yeah.
that one reacted
If you ever get a chance when COVID is over, there's an event called Science of Cocktails. Has anyone been? And Science World? It is a nonprofit. It funds all the school trips to Science World for the year. They haven't done it in 2 years. A bit pricey, but it is a lot of fun. Science of Cocktails. At Science World, usually at this time of year, actually, beginning of February. First Friday of February of the year. So that's when they call in all the bartenders around the city. So you'll see a lot of the what I like to call celebrity bartenders. So people like Grant Sini, Lauren Moat. Yeah, hi. They do a lot of features of what they're working on there, as I'm sure you're familiar.
Wow.
Yeah.
Been canceled again for this year.
It has.
Maybe next year.
It's always on the one of my close bartender friends. It's always his birthday on that weekend. We always went, but put on pause.
That's delicious.
A little bit different, right? Yeah.
What's the best milk to use? Does it matter?
So it's actually, once you start clarifying things, you go down a rabbit hole of trying to clarify with anything that says milk on it. So I've tried oat milk, almond milk, coconut milk. I've tried everything. If it doesn't have lactose in it, it's more difficult to clarify. Coconut milk is my best luck. The almond and oat milk are really difficult to do. It has to do with the temperature you use everything as well. But full fat milk is the most easiest way to get into it. Yeah.
You can never tell it's over.
there's so much alcohol in there. It's,
Wow.
That's
yeah.
But the texture is unbelievable. It's
Yeah.
so ebullient and waxy. And I think that's the beauty of clarifying techniques.
Yeah.
Architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again playing with that different mouthfeel, different textures, and
Bring you soup, the best for last.
Yeah.
that's for last.
Right on, serious.
He's been Malcolm for the, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was his first time milk washing it. He asked how I did it, and then we were comparing notes. He did it for 10 days. I did mine for 5 days.
And can't taste any danger will
Oh yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah. It's a dangerous one. On our menu, we have one with the clarified bourbon sour. That was inspired by. I found out that London Fog was created in Vancouver.
Really?
Yeah. We steal names, we steal cocktails. But the London Fog apparently was created in Vancouver, so I was inspired by that. I created a clarified bourbon sour with a Earl Grey foam on top. And yeah, if you ever want to try that one, it's I make mine a lot more sour, the actual clarified portion, and the foam sweeter. Whereas in Malcolm's, he made his more of into a liqueur style, which is why I balanced it with the Amaro for a bit of bitterness, and then lemon juice to obviously balance it out. It doesn't need too much more than that.
Did you like your cocktails when you started?
Me? A little bit.
I know you said you did
Yeah.
like perfectly balanced, but yeah, that's
It's-
well balanced.
It's one of those that are perfectly balanced, but it's still interesting. And that's what only time I'll make a cocktail perfectly balanced is if it's like a classic and that's what's expected, or if it's something interesting that has it's standout. Yeah.
Wow, Ray, it's fantastic. I learned so much. Great stories. It really is. It's all, a lot of personality comes through in everything that you do. Yeah. Respect.
I had a lot of fun too. So thanks for listening to me for too long. I think I went over the time a little bit, but
We're getting a sense of your signature style.
yeah.
Love it. We have some other things coming up. Next week, it's back to wine. It's kind of weird and wacky wine. Skin contact whites from around the world. I think there's still room in our Brunello masterclass. Oh, and maybe not.
That's increasing numbers, but I think it's a waiting list right now.
Okay, so that is 5 fabulous Brunellos with some paired bites. But if it is sold out, what we have also done is the chefs have created a special Tuscan menu. So you can book dinner and order a beautiful bottle of Brunello. We really stocked up on Brunello. So that's on the 18th. Sustainability is the theme the week after on the 23rd. You don't think of Chile as being, it's more of a commodity wine country, except it's not. Once you learn that, and their sustainability issues are second, and initiatives are second to none. The gourmet dinner, truffles and such. Doesn't that sound good? With wine and such, and Ray's going to create several cocktail pairings for that menu, not just wine.
It involves butter and truffles. It's a
butter cocktail.
it's a weird one.
And then if you're interested in wine, we're starting a WSC level 1. It's 2 half Sundays to come and learn more about this subject. And we had the winemaker from Martinis was going to join us tomorrow night or whatever, Friday night. And we got COVID, unfortunately, on Monday. So we've had to boost that dinner until the 4th of March. Tragically, can't do much about that. But many, many booze things happening. And of course, there's always Ray at the bar. So thanks so much again. Thanks to everyone at home. Ray, do you want to sign off?
Yeah.
Stop the recording.
Awesome.